Hi, I'm Jeff Davis, and this is a What's New in Anthos video brought to you by ROI Training. We're going to take a look at how to deploy Anthos clusters on Microsoft Azure using the new multi-cloud API. Let's switch over to the demo environment to see how it works. So deploying Anthos clusters on Azure is very much like deploying Anthos clusters on AWS, and I've done a video on that you can check out in addition to this video. But it starts by making sure that your target cloud environment is set up. The online documentation, which you can find easily enough, gives you a list of prerequisite configuration tasks. And so I've already done all of these. We'll take a quick look at them to make sure that they're in place. So I have my gCloud SDK configured and installed. I'm actually SSH'd into a Cloud Shell VM that's running the Cloud Shell. And I'm going to do some basic configuration tasks here. I'm going to set my default project, my default region, and I'm going to load the contents of my SSH key into an environment variable. The next thing that we need to do is we need to configure the Azure command line tool. So I already have that installed. So you can look here and see that it's ready to go. And then what we need to do is make sure that we have an Azure virtual network. So if I go to the virtual network page, you can see that I have a virtual network called Anthos Demo. We need to make sure that in addition to having the virtual network, we also have the subnet created and a NAT gateway and so forth. So if we look here, we can see that I have a public IP address that's associated with the NAT gateway. You can look here and see that I actually have the NAT gateway. If I click here, you can see that I've got a default subnet with the information about the subnet and so forth. So my networking is all set up. The next thing that we have to do is set up an Azure resource group. And so you can see I have a resource group and I've got my various Azure resources that are part of that group. We also need to set up identity and access management. So you can see that I've got role assignments for key management, user administration, stuff like that. We need to make sure that we've got certain resource providers like the Key Vault resource provider registered for the subscription. And we need to make sure that we have an Azure Active Directory application created. And so that's here. I don't have any virtual machines created as yet because we haven't deployed the control plane or the node pool nodes. So anyway, we've got everything set up and ready to go. Now what we're going to do is actually just follow the quick start article and set everything up. So we've already done the default project and the default location. So then we scroll down and we're going to use this command to generate the cluster. So I have a version of this command that has all of the deployment specific data set into place. And so we're going to go ahead and run it, and then I'll take a quick walk through it so you can see what the options are and what they're doing. This is going to be the name of the cluster that we're creating in Azure. This is the version of Anthos that we're deploying. This is the region, and there's a fixed number of regions. Only specific regions can receive incoming Anthos clusters. West US 2 is one of those. This is the GCP project where I'm registering all of my Anthos clusters for administration as a uniform fleet. This is the name of the client certificate that I'm using to talk to the Azure APIs. This is my resource group identifier, my network identifier, my subnet identifier. This is the range of IP addresses that I'm going to have available to assign to pods. This is the range of IP addresses that I have available to assign to services. This is the public key that I can use to SSH into the EC2 instances and so forth, and then some metadata information. So this takes somewhere between 5 to 10 minutes to run. So what we're going to do is jump ahead to when it's finished, and then we'll build the node. All right, so the command has completed successfully. You can see that we, in fact, have the control plane running in Azure. If we switch over to the Azure portal or dashboard, I can go to virtual machines, and we should see that there are 3 VMs that have been created. These are our control plane VMs. But we don't have any worker nodes as yet. So we need to create at least one node pool that has workers. So again, I'm just going to use the command that's provided in the documentation, and I'm going to create a node pool with a given name. That node pool will exist on a particular cluster. This is the size and shape of the VM for each of the worker nodes. This is the maximum number of pods per node. This is going to be an auto-scaling Kubernetes cluster. So the minimum number of nodes will be 1 and the maximum number will be 5. I give the public key, the subnet ID, and so forth. And then this again takes 5+ minutes to run. So we're going to jump ahead till it's done and then look at the results. Okay, so I've successfully completed the node pool. And in fact, if you look in the Azure portal, you can see under virtual machine scale sets, there's a new scale set. This is because we created an auto-scaling node pool. If I drill down into this, you can see that there is one instance, and this is my worker node. So now I have a control plane with 3 nodes. I have a node pool with 1 node. It's time to actually use the cluster as a Kubernetes cluster. So the first thing that I need to do is modify my kubeconfig file with a context that points to the newly created cluster. So I can create that by going to gcloud container Azure clusters get credentials. And when I do this, then I should be able to do something like kubecontrol get nodes. Now I've got an alias that says k equals kubecontrol and kc equals kubecontext. But you can see this highlights the fact that I do in fact have 1 worker node. Now I'm not actually connecting from kubecontrol on this machine directly to the API server of the Anthos cluster in Azure. Instead, if you were to look at my kubeconfig file, you can see that I am connecting to a Google Cloud service. This is the Connect Gateway service, and it's a proxy. So I don't have to VPN into the Azure virtual network. I don't have to have a Bastion host in Azure. Instead, my machine where I'm doing the administration connects to the Google service. The Google service acts as a proxy and forwards the commands over an encrypted channel to the remote API server. This is set up for you automatically, and it makes it easier and faster to administer the remote cluster. If you look in the Google console, if we go to the Kubernetes engine portion of the console, you can see that I have an entry here. The Connect agent is running on my Azure cluster and is talking to Google Cloud. I've authenticated the console so that it can log into the remote cluster, and I can see information about the number of nodes, the actual node, worker nodes themselves. I can see the workloads that have been deployed. There's a monitoring agent, there's a logging agent, and so forth. So now what we're going to do is just very simply deploy an application. So I'm going to use this command to create a deployment. And we can watch for the pods to complete their launching. So this application is running. And I want this application to be accessible over the network from outside the cluster. So I'm going to create a new service. And you'll notice that this is a load balancer service. If I look at the services, you can see that it's currently building out the load balancer, and it's waiting on an external IP address. So this is actually building an Azure native load balancer, and the service will be accessible once the external IP address becomes available. If we go back to the Azure portal, we should see that originally there were no load balancers. If I do a quick refresh, you can see that there's a load balancer that has been created automatically just by creating the load balancer service in Kubernetes. And it has created an external IP address. And if I go back and I load a page for that IP address, what I should get as the load balancer settles down is I should get access to the application that's running on the cluster. And there we go. We're running our Hello World application successfully on an Anthos cluster in Azure. And it's as easy as that. If you enjoyed this video, do me a favor and click the like button, then share the video with your friends and colleagues on Twitter and LinkedIn. If you want to see the AWS video or other videos that I've done, feel free to look through our YouTube channel. And if you want to hear about new videos that we put out, click on the subscribe button. Thanks very much.